Lawyer Olivia Taylor was one of the first to meet with Douglas Chappell. She was introduced by the head of the administrative offices of G.E. Schenectady. At her first glance at the tall, very handsome manager, Olivia felt an interpersonal attraction that she had to suppress with all her professional self-control. After all, she would have to work with him, and she was not the type of woman to admire or openly flirt with a man. Douglas Chappell was the new head of real estate taxation for G.E. Schenectady. Olivia was a senior paralegal in the office of a corporate lawyer. The real estate group was a separate but associated office with G.E. Schenectady. Doug was not Olivia's boss, nor was he above her in the corporate structure. However, he was a rising star, clearly destined for rapid promotion. He was also amazingly handsome and possessed that unique set of personal qualities that are defined as charisma. His arrival sent shockwaves through G.E. Schenectady's female workforce, from women in manufacturing plants to women in executive offices. Mostly women worked in the legal department, both at the clerical and professional levels, and this had a particularly strong impact. At first, Olivia was oblivious to the whispers and speculation among her female colleagues. It's not that it didn't concern her, it's just that she didn't allow herself to go down that path. As word spread about Doug's skills in the bedroom and his extraordinary virtue, she became increasingly interested, despite her determination not to. She watched as her female colleagues and even her own secretary, Julie Stevenson, flirted shamelessly with Doug Chappell, but Olivia resisted such stupid feminine behavior. After all, she is a lawyer and married to that. She had progressed enough in her career to buy a nice colonial-style home in Delmar, near an elementary school. It was a prelude to having children, which she and her husband David discussed. In her typical fashion, Olivia has saved a decent amount of money in case she has children. She was a planner and carefully prepared for each of the specific stages of her life. Her marriage to David after college and before law school might have seemed rushed to some, but it was actually part of a carefully thought-out strategy. While she was in law school, David began teaching high school physics, putting his career ambition of becoming a marine biologist on hold. He imagined himself living on a yacht in a more southern climate. It was the sort of romantic dream that David was prone to, and was largely what attracted him to his more practical wife. As their family life showed, David enjoyed teaching, and for the last 2 years he returned to graduate school in the evenings and during the summer. However, with 2 incomes, the couple were well prepared to become parents. David's dream will remain a dream washed ashore on the upper Hudson River. Their dog, Buster, appeared as the only surprise in Olivia's orderly existence. Buster was from a shelter. Olivia's husband, David, took his class on a school field trip to an animal shelter. At the shelter, David discovered a small, unfortunate puppy that looked too ugly to be easily adopted. But David, being a romantic, fell under the spell of 2 large brown eyes. He ignored the clumsy and ugly face of the Irish wolfhound St. Bernard Cross and brought the newly minted Buster home to introduce him to Olivia. At first glance, she was doubtful about such a new addition to their small family, but it seemed like little compensation for the loss of a big dream. The puppy grew into a monstrously large, ugly dog that frightened the guests, but only for an instant. Buster was a gentle giant whose only threat was that he could lick you to death. Olivia realized that she loved this huge beast almost as much as she loved her husband. They were 2 big and sweet creatures that looked strange and fierce, but inside they were loving and beautiful. Olivia had a house, a dog, and a happy, content marriage with the promise of future children. At least that was the case until Doug Chappell started wooing her. She was just his type, a beautiful girl turned into an even more beautiful woman. She had not yet lost the shyness and trepidation of her youth, and there was still in her appearance the innocence so attractive to a young wife. But most of all, she avoided him. For a man who enjoyed easy success with women, the ones he had to woo were always more desirable. Walking into Olivia's office one afternoon, Doug said, Something needs to be done about these triple-priced rentals in the city of Colony. He moved around Olivia's desk until he stopped, almost touching her. He leaned one arm on the back of her chair and with the other pointed to the spreadsheet he had spread out on her computer desktop. GE's real estate team has a strong track record of successfully fighting property taxes. However, the city of Colony was a formidable opponent. The city experienced significant commercial expansion beginning in the 1960s and was vigorous in protecting its taxes. "What are you offering?" Olivia asked Doug. At these words, she turned in her chair, finding herself practically between his arms. She was close enough to feel the warmth of his body and felt his almost magnetic pull. "I thought that since, according to the lease agreement, we have the rights of owners, we would file a claim for the assessment of the property. Total?" He looked her straight in the eyes, answering, "Yes, everything. I don't like to leave anything unfinished." She sensed that he was talking about more than just rent, and it stirred up in her an unbidden emotion that was both exciting and frightening. "This is a big deal. You will see there is strong protection there. I believe that a vigorous attack can always overcome the defense." Olivia began working on tax cases with Doug. He hired independent assessors and conducted the initial tax challenge, while Olivia began preparing motions in the case. The city did not change its assessment, which was almost everywhere the standard 150% of the cost, rather than the actual cost, as required by law. However, Olivia had to do a lot of work preparing these cases for trial. Doug kept this job under personal supervision, which required him to communicate a lot with Olivia. He wasn't kidding, making serious attacks both in tax matters and in Olivia's resistance to his sexual advances. She fought with all her might, although she wanted nothing more than to capitulate at his first attack. She was a normal woman with all the desires a woman could have, but her own inexperience added to her problems. Sexually, Olivia did not know any man other than her husband. He was the first for her, just as she was for him. Her plan was to remain faithful to each other until death do them part, but she couldn't help but wonder what the other man would be like. She had no doubt that Doug was extraordinary in bed. There were several women in her own office who allegedly kept his sheets warm, including Olivia's secretary, Julie, who had a 2-month affair with Doug. Julie boasted about her adventures with him and ended the relationship only when her husband began to suspect something. Julie's husband was not the patient or understanding type. Olivia is not Julie, and although Olivia's husband, David, was not a jealous person, his trust and unconditional love did not allow Olivia to betray him. She wasn't a traitor. Olivia wouldn't go behind her husband's back, but Doug was hard to resist, and deep down she knew she didn't want to resist. It's not that David was a wimp in the bedroom, but he was ordinary, above average height, below average looks, and averagely gifted where it mattered. If men are judged by character, David was a prince. He was definitely Olivia's prince, and she knew it from their first meeting, when they sat next to each other in freshman biology class. They simply suited each other in many ways. She loved David, but there was something about Doug that made him irresistible. True to his word, Doug decisively went on the offensive. He flirted shamelessly. He praised her hair, shoes, dress, all the jewelry and costume jewelry that she wore. If she were honest with herself, Olivia would admit that almost from Doug's first appearance at the GE office, she began to dress differently. She stopped wearing pants to work. The striped jackets from her lawyer's suit were complemented by skirts, and each time they became shorter and shorter. Everything about Olivia began to change, from the way she styled her hair and the way she smelled it, to the lace tops of the stockings that replaced her tights. Outwardly, Olivia, caught in the corset of external decency, resisted, but the sensual woman inside her made her way out. Doug Chappell knew how to cut women's corsets. He suggested having a work lunch, but off campus, where they could work undisturbed and have a drink after lunch. "Just one," he said. "You deserve it." Drinking would lead to a late return home. At first, David was waiting for her at home with Buster. But as summer turned to autumn, David was often not at home. He said he was working on his boat. During his first summer of teaching, he purchased a small sunfish boat and learned to sail Lake George. Eventually, David began working at the Albany Yacht Club during his summer vacation, earning just over minimum wage. Olivia believed that this would help him realize at least some part of his dream. This supplemented the funds they were saving for their children, a kind of children's fund. Olivia couldn't protest that David wasn't home since she was so often late, but Buster was always there to give her a questioning or accusing look. Whether Buster knew about her internal conflict and how dangerously she was going to the edge, he could not say. David, if he suspected, pretended not to notice. Things were clearly coming to a crescendo when the long New York winter arrived with an October ice storm. David had what he would call a non-working day. It's not that he hated teaching. In fact, he liked this activity. This is a much more difficult profession than people think. There is a lot of politics with a small p in it. You have to listen to the bullshit that school administrators spew and then figure out how to get the job done in spite of it. You have to deal with the machinations of fellow teachers, listen to their complaints, and avoid getting involved in their personal lives and professional grievances. And then there are the parents, either too involved in the lives of their children or too indifferent, since there is never a middle ground. Finally, the work itself. In 9th grade, David taught 3 general physics classes, with an average of 26 students per class for a total of 78 students. Year after year, they passed through his class, not understanding the physical world around them and caring only about who they were dating, what their favorite pop star or rapper was doing, and most of all, how they looked and how they were perceived by their fellow 9th graders. He would be the first to admit that he has an easier time than the teachers of English, mathematics, or, God forbid, social studies. Physics was a subject that could attract the attention of students, especially if you make a small explosion at the beginning of the lesson. It is easy to attract their attention. It is more difficult to keep it. And in this sense, he had the most difficult job, to find a way to convey the rules of the universe to the future builders and shapers of our society. He understood how dangerous ignorance of physics could be for society. His responsibilities were complicated by administrators, parents, politicians, religious leaders, and a grossly ignorant society that viewed his work as simply preparing students to take a series of standardized tests designed by fools for the ignorant. David had a job that could easily be hated, but which he accepted with joy. However, he reached a point where he began to fear his future in the classroom. He yearned for his lost dreams, and when the weather permitted, sailed his small boat on the cold Hudson. Unfortunately, the weather was terrible that October day. The overlapping layers of cold and moisture in the atmosphere brought neither rain nor snow, but covered roads, trees, and power lines with a layer of ice. By midday, schools and most businesses were closed due to the emergency declaration. He knew Olivia's Audi was not suitable for this weather. So I picked up my wife in my old Ford diesel pickup truck. Her Audi could stay overnight in the company lot, and he would drive her safely home and back to work the next day. David arrived at GE's Schenectady campus in the middle of the afternoon. He expected to have to drag Olivia out of the office early, but found that most of the GE site was already empty and was surprised to see Olivia walking away from her building. However, she was not alone. A tall guy walked next to her, holding an umbrella in one hand, and his other arm wrapped around Olivia's waist. The way they moved together spoke of a familiarity and relationship that was greater than 2 colleagues sharing an umbrella. There are times when you observe a student having difficulty learning a subject. He does the work, but the meaning of the lesson eludes him. One moment he is experiencing difficulties and is in the dark, and suddenly his eyes light up and he understands what is happening. Perhaps it was because of something you demonstrated or said, but more often than not, the insight just comes naturally. The moment when all the disparate threads come together and understanding comes. David had such a moment, but the teacher was not him, but his wife, Olivia. Crossing the icy sidewalk, Olivia leaned against the strange man she was walking with, resting her head on his chest and hugging him tightly. It may have been the prudent act of a woman trying to avoid falling, but her actions were all too familiar. There was no hesitation. She, a married woman, clings to a man who was not her husband, but does not show any awkwardness or concern. At that moment, David realized the meaning of all the little signs that he had seen, but had not realized until that moment. The way she dressed for work, the strange absent-mindedness she displayed at home for months, and the fact that she was seriously and constantly late getting home. This should have become obvious earlier, but he suspected nothing. He was naive and blinded by love. His first instinct was to leave, but he wasn't like that. He turned his truck around and smoothly stepped on the gas pedal, causing his truck to come between the couple under the umbrella and the entrance to the parking lot. Olivia and Doug looked up as the truck stopped, blocking their path. Doug looked like he was going to yell at David, but before he could, David rolled down the window and leaned out. "I thought it wouldn't hurt to give my wife a ride home," David said. He saw that the man holding the umbrella had swallowed all the words he was about to say. Olivia just stood there, frozen with her mouth open. David leaned out of the truck window into the freezing rain. He looked his wife in the eyes and said, "Go down." There were threatening notes in his voice. Olivia pulled away from Doug and walked around the truck to open the passenger door and climb inside. While she did this, David stared at Doug, who was trying to smile back. Once Olivia was in the car, David nodded to the man holding the umbrella and put the truck into drive mode. Usually the drive to their home in Del Mar took about 30 minutes, but due to bad weather, the trip was delayed by more than an hour. It seemed much longer to the occupants of the truck's cabin. They drove in silence until they turned onto a bypass road in the city of Bethlehem. Moments from the house, David pointed at a hive. "Were you ever going to tell me about him?" David asked, his voice barely a whisper. Olivia was looking out the passenger window and didn't turn to look at him. She thought about denying everything, but then decided that there was nothing to deny. "No, because there's nothing to tell," she said. "Doug is my colleague. I like him and he likes me." "Do you communicate as closely with all your work friends?" "No, of course not," Olivia said, and paused briefly before continuing. "Doug is something special to me. We are close to him in something more than simple friendship." As his Ford turned onto Delaware Avenue, heading toward Del Mar Place and their small 3-bedroom colonial, David considered his wife's statement. "How far does this friendship with Mr. Umbrella go?" "His name is Douglas Chappell. He works in the real estate department." "So he's just a colleague," David said, pronouncing the words with such sarcasm in his voice that it was clear that he didn't believe in them. By this time, they had reached the driveway and side door of their house. Without responding to David's accusations, Olivia jumped out of the car and rushed into the house. David backed the truck into the garage before going inside. By the time he walked through the kitchen door, Olivia was upstairs in the master bedroom. Just outside the kitchen door, Buster was waiting for his walk. Despite the inclement weather, the man and his dog went outside. They walked toward the elementary school and its outdoor playing fields, empty in the freezing rain. Buster wasn't worried about the weather. He seemed like an animal made for testing. By the time they returned, they were both soaked through. They went down the side door into the basement, where David threw his wet clothes into the wash and pulled clean ones out of the dryer. Buster shook himself off to dry himself, but David helped him with an old beach towel he kept in the basement for that purpose. When they went back to the kitchen, they found Olivia waiting for them in a terry robe and sitting at the kitchen table with an open bottle of wine. "We need to talk," she announced, pouring wine into 2 glasses. David took a seat at the table but did not sit opposite her. He sat at the end so that she had to turn to look at him. It also allowed him to turn around so that she couldn't look him straight in the eye. Olivia's tone was gentle but firm. "I want you to know that I love you and am very happy in our marriage," she began. "But although there was nothing romantic with Doug, we can say that we feel a strong attraction to each other." "And what is this supposed to mean?" David felt his anger rising. It wasn't just jealousy that overwhelmed him. He felt deep resentment and a feeling that he had been betrayed. Olivia was his only love. In truth, this was his first and only relationship. She was his first girlfriend, and with her, he found a sense of satisfaction and togetherness that filled the void in his life. She spoke again, and something about the way she worded her words carefully reminded him that his wife was a lawyer, a woman who is loving and caring, but whose profession is to choose words to achieve a goal. "This means that we have a strong marriage, and I am completely devoted to him," Olivia said. "I love you, but no more than you. I am able to control my every desire. I am a woman with all the physical limitations of my gender. We can't do anything about who we're attracted to. I didn't know any other man but you. It's a fact that Doug seduces me. I can't deny it." "And," he said, "because there is something more, so say it." She sighed. "It is not easy. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I need to get Doug Chappell out of my head. It's too hard to work with him every day and not know what it might be like." "It seems that," he specified. "You are the only man I have ever been in bed with. It must be impressive. I can't help but be curious, and he made it clear to me that he wants me. But I didn't even kiss him, and I won't, unless—" She let the last word hang in the air, but David turned away as she spoke, and with her last word he stood up and said, "We need to feed Buster." Olivia dropped the question. She was caught between the love she felt for her husband and the desire she felt as a woman. 3 weeks have passed since the ice storm. The weather changed, and it was an unusually warm November. It seemed like every year the weather became more unpredictable. At the end of the season, hurricanes raged in the Caribbean, but there was a bitter cold between Olivia and David. After that conversation, or rather, Olivia's monologue at the kitchen table, they barely communicated. When Olivia returned to work after the hurricane, Doug wanted to know what she had with David. "Was he not aggressive?" asked Doug. Or, "No, I think he was shocked and, of course, wounded," she answered. "He's not cruel." "Well, I thought I saw murder in his eyes," Doug asserted. "No, he's just offended." "I heard him," Olivia said as she left. Doug was not a physically masculine man, and David's appearance belied his gentle nature. This was unlike Julie Stevenson's husband Louis, whose short stature and slight build hid a fiery temper. Thanksgiving passed, and Christmas soon arrived, along with the office holiday party. The event was small, only in one building and without alcoholic stimulation. Nevertheless, everything appeared, albeit not for long. By that December, Doug had already slept with most of the most attractive women in GE Schenectady. None of the women complained. Only the conquest of Olivia was not crowned with success, but the fight was not over yet. Ever since her husband showed up that icy October day, Olivia had kept her distance from him. But as time passed, the situation began to look promising again. Doug managed to catch Olivia outside her office as the party began to disperse. The next moment, they found themselves in her office with the door closed and began to kiss. "I can't," she said, pulling away. "Why? You said your husband wouldn't cause us any problems." "It's still treason. I owe David more than that." "What do you owe yourself?" he said. "You know what you want. You can't deny it." He pulled her into a tight hug and kissed her. No matter how hard she tried to resist, she responded and put all the heat of her barely restrained passion into the kiss. It took all her will to break free. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "And we almost don't have time," said a frustrated Doug. "What?" "I'm being transferred to headquarters in New York. I'll be leaving at the end of January." "This has not been announced yet." "It won't be officially announced until the 1st of the new year, but I was told to prepare for the transfer." With these words, he kissed her again, but Olivia continued to refuse him. On the way home, Olivia thought about her situation. She wanted Doug, but not forever. His departure was a good thing, but she felt like she was missing something that wouldn't happen again. She loved her husband, David, and wanted to have a home and children with him. Suddenly, however, motherhood began to seem like a trap that would slam shut before she could experience life. Doug asked what she owed herself. Shouldn't she have some experience before she gets old? Will she really miss the chance to be with a man like Doug Chappell? If he left, she would miss her opportunity, and she knew that such a chance would not come again. By the time she pulled into her driveway, she had convinced herself that she needed to be with Doug at least once before he left for New York. But she had no intention of deceiving her husband. She will talk to David and explain that she needs this one opportunity to experience something different. In some ways, Doug's imminent departure makes things easier. It would just be this one time, and then he would leave and she and David could go back to the comfortable life they had, but she would still have this experience. It was necessary to find the right moment to broach this topic with David. She didn't want to talk about it as a fait accompli. This should arise in a discussion in which they could reach an understanding, a starting point to do exactly what she wanted. Of course, she didn't see it that way at all. Usually they talked and she got her way. Few marriages become truly equal. In most of them, one side dominates. The degree of dominance is what causes friction, but in the case of Olivia and David, she dominated, and there was almost no friction between them. So far, on every issue in their marriage, David had completely agreed. However, unfortunately, this is why Olivia's current desire was about to explode into a growing earthquake. She decided that the best time to impress David with the fact of her desires would be right after dinner and before they retired to the bedroom for sex. Olivia chose Sunday evening after the office holiday party. She cooked David's favorite roast for dinner. After dinner, I tried to clean up while David lay on the sofa and watched one of his nature shows. About 9 o'clock, she slid next to him on the sofa. He turned to her, catching the faint scent of her Chanel perfume. Before he could speak, she kissed him on the lips and then said, "I want to talk about the problem between us." "Problems?" "About my attraction to Doug Chappell." "Is this Doug, Mr. Umbrella?" "Yes, the man is in the parking lot," she said. "I'm attracted to him." "What does it mean?" "He wants me sexually," she said, and paused. "And I want him." She felt his body tense next to her, and then he pulled away. Not wanting to accept his refusal, she pressed her whole body against him. She laid her head on his chest and took his hands in hers. "It won't change how I feel about you," she said. "I will always want you. It's just that now, at the moment, I want him, and then only physically." David didn't like it. He gently pushed her away and held her at arm's length. In response, he made her look into his eyes. "What are you trying to tell me? Did you sleep with him? Because that's not what a wife says to her husband unless she confesses something." She smiled and looked into his eyes again. "I would never sleep with him," she began, "without telling you first." "So what are you telling me now?" he asked. "I'm saying I want to have this affair before we have kids." We had saved enough to have children, but we were hesitant. We waited. I waited. And now I understand why. Why? I have never been with another man. I didn't know what it was. I was too controlled when I was young. I haven't experienced life. Was too busy studying to enjoy college or law school. I just want this one fling before we start living a good life, a great marriage and kids. I only want one short meeting. "You want to have an affair with Mr. Umbrella?" he almost shouted. "No," she answered, "just one meeting. He gets promoted and moves to headquarters in New York. He leaves after the new year. I just want to spend a couple of days with him before he leaves. Weekend and nothing more." "What if I refuse?" David asked, although he already knew the answer. "I was hoping that you would understand that I need this experience." She didn't give David a chance to respond, but she kissed him and snuggled close to him. "Everything will be fine," she thought, as they began their usual dance of love. On his part, the lovemaking had a bittersweet undertone. Something was lost. She was the only woman he had ever known, and until a few minutes ago, she was the only woman he expected to know intimately. Olivia decided the matter was resolved and told Doug that her first weekend in January would be his. Doug's house was on a quiet street in Niskayuna. For the area, the house was a modest three-bedroom split level, in an area that preferred five-bedroom colonials with a center hall. As agreed, his attached garage was open, waiting. Olivia parked her Audi next to Doug's Porsche. He was waiting for her in the living room with an open bottle of wine. For a moment, he was underneath her in the living room as she walked down from the garage to the main floor. He got the full look from the short black dress that hugged her body, highlighting the fullness of her breasts and the seductive curve of her hips. She saw a mixture of lust and anticipation in his eyes. It was so different from the look her husband had given her when she left him just 20 minutes ago. David's eyes were sad. There was a pain in them that she would like to take away if she could, but she had told him that it would only be one time, and then she would be his forever. They will have children together. If, thanks to love, their marriage can survive a small affair, then it will be reliable. Their marriage can be considered strong. She told her husband about this because she sincerely believed in it. What she was about to do was an adventure and nothing more. She wanted to strengthen their marriage and, she hoped, her love for her husband. Something in her believed that she had already done the latter. Her body was tingling with anticipation, from her fingertips to the soles of her feet. Her mind was buzzing with excitement. Their bodies moved simultaneously, as if drawn by an invisible force, and met in an embrace in the center of his living room. Doug kissed her, wrapping his arms around her, but pulled away and said, "One glass of wine, and then we'll go out to dinner. I have tickets to see the band's visit at Proctor Music Hall." Doug knew how to express his gratitude for his conquest. Give her wine, treat her to dinner, and show her how to have a good time. He enjoyed his triumph and assured himself that he was giving as much as he was taking. "I'm all yours this weekend," Olivia assured him. They dined at a romantic Italian restaurant in downtown Schenectady and enjoyed a show at a converted and remodeled vaudeville theater. They drank very little, but when he brought her to his home, he opened a bottle of champagne. They drank during their weekend together and then went to the bedroom and began to satisfy the attraction that had brought them together. He undressed her as if unwrapping a priceless piece of art and told her how beautiful she was. She saw that he was enjoying her body. He appreciated her in a way she had never experienced before. She felt as beautiful as he described her, here with this most handsome of men. His hands danced over her body, driving her desire to the limit. She pulled his shirt away from his chest, revealing the dark hair that covered his chest. It was so different from her husband's almost bare chest. But she quickly pushed thoughts of David out of her mind. She could think about him later. This moment was meant for her and her lover. They lay down in his double bed, the satin sheets of which were made for sex. He started taking off the lace lingerie her husband had bought, but she had never worn it until now. She unzipped his pants and he tossed them aside. He left her wearing a garter belt and stockings. It was the most perfect sex of her life, but it was far from over. They had the weekend, 2 more blissful days. Sunday came too early. They spent most of the weekend in bed. The sex was great, and he was also creative, among other things. It was great, but she was ready to go home and make peace with David. Late on Sunday night, they ordered Chinese takeout, and after they ate, they had sex one last time before she showered, packed, and changed into the short black dress she had worn on Friday night. She left the house the same way she came in, through his garage. She got into the car and drove out through the open garage door, thus hiding from the curious neighbors. No one would say that she spent the weekend with Douglas. The most she could be accused of was being in public with him on Friday night. Soon he will leave for a promotion in New York, and she and her husband will begin to work on the birth of a child. She was very happy with her life. 20 minutes later, Olivia parked her Audi in the driveway. The house was strangely dark. The porch lights were out, and she didn't see David's truck. I decided that David had moved the truck to the garage. Opening the side door, she looked for Buster, who was supposed to greet her return, but he was not on the threshold. She shouted, "I'm home!" I expected Buster to come running, but the dog did not appear. She walked into the kitchen, then into the living room. Both there and there were empty. She shouted again, "David, I'm home!" There was no answer, only silence. "Probably went for a late walk," she said to herself. "David must be in a bad mood. He always hangs out with Buster late when he's in a bad mood." She went to the refrigerator for ice and then poured herself a glass of whiskey. I checked the bottle to see if David had drunk, but it was almost full. She sat down on the sofa in the living room and, stretching her legs, settled into a comfortable corner. She was very tired, but knew that she had to wait for David to return to show him that nothing had changed, except perhaps that her love for him had become even stronger. From now on, he will be treated like the prince that he is. Despite her good intentions, Olivia fell asleep. I woke up to the ringing of the front door. The hallway is next to the living room, and the front doorbell can be really loud. Olivia was surprised to see daylight streaming through the windows. She must have fallen asleep. As she approached the front door, her mind told her that something was wrong. Buster. He wasn't jumping up and down near the door. "Where is Buster?" she thought sleepily. Opening the door, she saw a tall woman whose hair was pulled back. She was wearing a cheap dark pantsuit. "Olivia Taylor?" the woman asked. "Yes. How can I help you?" Olivia answered. "Mrs. David Taylor?" "Yes. What's the matter?" "I'm Detective Sylvia Marks," the woman announced, flashing her gold badge. "Can I come in? I need to ask you a few questions." Olivia instinctively stepped back to allow the detective to enter, but then something dawned on her. "Oh no," Olivia exclaimed. "Is there really something wrong with David?" Detective Marks walked into the living room, where she turned and looked Olivia up and down. Olivia was still wearing the clothes she'd come home in the previous evening, the short black dress she'd worn to dinner with Doug. Olivia realized how inappropriate her dress was for the early morning and felt exposed and embarrassed. "As far as I know, no," the detective answered. "I'm here about Douglas Chappell." "Daga? Well, that is, Mr. Chappell? And what happened to him?" Olivia felt out of place and confused, which was apparently what the detective wanted. "He was attacked last night while he was taking out the trash in front of his house," the detective began, taking a small notebook from her pocket. "He claims that he was attacked by a man wearing a ski mask and holding a small club." "Oh my God! Are you here because you suspect David?" "Actually, no," Detective Marks said with a smile she couldn't suppress. The corners of her mouth turned up as she said, "David Taylor has been ruled out as a suspect, although I admit, in these circumstances, he was our first thought. Especially after Mr. Chappell told us so quickly that he spent the weekend with you." Detective Mark's smile turned into a slight smirk. Olivia felt bad and wanted to sit on the sofa, but in the end, she just collapsed on it. Detective Marks followed suit and sat on the edge of the overstuffed chair opposite Olivia. "You said that my husband is not a suspect?" Olivia asked, her voice shaking a little. "No. The manager and staff of the Albany Yacht Club say he launched his boat, Amor, and sailed south yesterday afternoon. Given the time of year, they decided it would be best to track him via his VHF radio and were able to determine that he was on the Hudson in the Poughkeepsie area at the time of the attack." "Boat?" Olivia asked, beginning to regain some of her professional composure. "He went out on the river in his little sailing boat in January," Olivia finished incredulously. Detective Marks turned to her notepad. Turning the page, she said, 12-meter Catalina, according to the manager of the yacht club. Apparently, he bought it in December and has been preparing it for the past month. They say he is lucky that there is so little ice on the river this winter. He is believed to be heading south. Olivia jumped up and ran up the stairs. Everything in the bedroom was in its place until she looked closer and realized that some of David's things were missing. Little was taken from his closet, filled with work clothes, but his dresser drawers were almost empty. However, it was on the chest of drawers that she found his note, or rather a greeting card, beautifully sealed in an envelope. The outside of the card read, "I can't express how sorry I am." There was a small poem inside, but she only glanced at it briefly because he left a handwritten note. Dear Olivia, I accepted a job in Florida at a small marine research institute. It's only an entry-level position, but it's already begun. I'm sorry to leave, but I can't stay in this marriage anymore. And I think you were right when you said, we have to experience everything in life before we really settle down. I'll miss you, but I'm not sure I still love you. I took the money I had saved for our children's fund and bought a boat so I could sail south and live there when I got to Florida. Do what you want with the house and the divorce. I hope you won't be angry and everything will work out for you with that guy with the umbrella. Goodbye, David Detective Marks. Heard Olivia's sad cry and went upstairs to find out what was wrong. Finding Olivia kneeling on the bedroom floor, she helped the woman up and onto the bed. Sylvia felt a little guilty as she sat Olivia down and asked if she could get the grieving woman a drink. Sylvia didn't really like lawyers. In addition, Sylvia herself lost her husband because of another woman and did not really sympathize with those who cheat on their spouse. However, now she was reacting like one abandoned woman to another. Let me make you some tea, Sylvia suggested. No, I can handle it, Olivia replied. Let's go back to the living room and I'll answer your questions. Actually, I only have one question. Have you ever seen Louis Stevenson during these last few days that you spent with Mr. Chappell? You mean my secretary Julie's husband? Yes, but I've never met him, and I have no idea what he looks like. I have a photograph of him, the detective said, and handed Olivia a photograph of the rude man. Looking at the photo, Olivia shuddered and said, Sorry, never seen him before. Well, it was just a possibility. The victim couldn't identify him, but I figured if he was following you both this weekend, you might have caught a glimpse of him. I didn't see him following us. Do you think he attacked Doug? Yes, he is a likely suspect, Sylvia began in a cold, professional voice. He has a criminal record for assault and a history of jealousy. Once your husband was eliminated, he became the obvious choice. He, of course, has an alibi provided by a group of friends. I was hoping you could match him with the crime scene so I could break his alibi. Sorry, but I can't help you. Will Doug be okay? He was beaten quite badly, especially in the genitals. He is in the hospital, but I would wait a few days before visiting him. Olivia nodded as they walked down the stairs. I won't be able to see him for a day or two, Olivia said. I will have to follow my husband and ask him for forgiveness. It can be difficult, Sylvia said. He might be floating under the George Washington Bridge right now. With that last comment, Detective Marks left the Taylor house. Detective Marks was wrong about one thing. By the time she left his former home, David Taylor and his dog Buster, aboard the 12-meter yacht Amur, had passed the Statue of Liberty and exited New York Harbor. David then turned to starboard and headed southeast, leaving New York astern and his marriage behind him.